Kia ora tātou. As Bree mentioned earlier, I'm Warwick, and I'm guessing that in the drama earlier, when we were hearing all those negative things being said about people, that some of you will have voices like that in your head. I know I do. And they're so hurtful, they sear themselves into our subconscious, and they stay there for years, sometimes decades, and it's really hard to get rid of them. But today I want to give you some good news that there is an antidote. And the antidote is what God says about you, because that can be trusted and that is true. You see, God is the maker of the masterpiece. That is you. You are a living work of art. And I know a lot of us really struggle to accept that. We don't think of ourselves as a work of art, let alone a masterpiece. And that's because we tend to think of a masterpiece as something like a kakuhu, a feather cloak, something which is a taonga, a treasure, or maybe a famous painting by New Zealand artist Rita Angus. We can all say, well, that's clearly a work of art. Or maybe a really special carving that we have in the South Atrium at Auckland Museum. Most people would say, yep, for sure, that is a work of art. But not me, not flawed, sinful, human me. Well, again, I've got some good news for you. You have at least 3 things in common with the most famous painting in the world, the Mona Lisa. Okay, let's test this out. First of all, the Mona Lisa, well, certainly the one hanging in the Louvre in Paris, is absolutely unique. There are lots of copies. You see the Mona Lisa all over social media. She's used and abused all around the world. But in terms of the original, there's definitely only one. All the art experts agree. And let me share this with you. The same is true of you. You are unique. Roughly 8 billion people on our planet now, but there is only one person who is provably you. Some of the others are similar. Your siblings, you might be an identical twin, a lot of similarities. But your DNA, your personality set you apart from all of the others. Absolutely, you are unique. Now, is the Mona Lisa irreplaceable? Absolutely. Da Vinci's been dead 500 years. So we can continue to make copies, but we can never replace the original hanging up in the Louvre. And the same is true of you. We can't replace you. Your DNA, your personality that I've already referred to, that can't be just cloned. If ever human cloning comes about, that will not be another you. They'll start off with the same DNA, but DNA is affected by our environment. It changes. And your experiences shape who you are, shapes your personality. So you are also irreplaceable, just like her. And therefore, the third thing that you share with the most famous painting in the world is the fact that you are priceless. You think the French are ever going to sell the Mona Lisa? No way. And you are not for sale either, because you're priceless. You're worth far more than money or treasure of any kind, because you are a human masterpiece, a living masterpiece. Whereas this, at the end of the day, this is just a piece of canvas with paint on it. I mean, she's neat, but she can't compare with you. No way. Sadly, the message that we hear in the world is that we're far more like Corona Lisa. Sickly, diseased, poorly made, cousins of monkeys, cosmic freaks with no purpose and no creator. Basically made to just pig out, poop, procreate, and pop off. That's a sad message, isn't it? But the Bible has a much more positive message. And the story told in the Bible is that you were created by an all-powerful God. A God who loves us. A God who wants the best for us. Of course, there is an enemy who's out to destroy us, and sin has messed up the natural world. It's messed up us to a large extent as well. But more good news, God has a rescue plan. And you're going to hear more about that during this series. So today I want to tell you a little bit more about this Creator God. In one of the books in the earlier part of the Bible called the Old Testament, there's a book called Ecclesiastes. And in there, it has this really interesting comment. As you do not know what is the way of the wind, or how the bones grow in the womb of her who is with child, so you do not know the works of God who makes everything. Well, today we're not going to study meteorology. I mean, predicting the weather, that's really tough. That's way beyond me. But we are going to study a little bit of human biology, because this tells us if we knew a little bit more about how we were put together during the first 9 months that we spent inside our mother's womb, we would have some insight into the Creator God. Now, I think that's a challenge worth taking on. You know, in the first book of the Bible, it's called Genesis, it tells us something about all the other things that God made. It tells us that He made the whenua, the land. And just think about the beautiful land in which we live here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. That's impressive, right? And of course, the whole planet. Really impressive. He made all the living things, the vegetation, all the plants and trees. And think about Kofi and Kauri. Magnificent creations that we have right here in our country. Genesis goes on to say He made the moon and the sun. And almost as an afterthought, He made the 200 billion trillion stars found in 100 billion galaxies. And that only gets one line in the Bible? Come on. We know the oceans, the rivers, the lakes are filled with living creatures, from the tiniest single-cell protozoa to the mighty blue whale. The birds that fly above the earth, the hummingbirds, the birds of paradise, peacocks and kiwi. The animals, the wild animals, insects, reptiles, marsupials, mammals, tuatara. But He saved the best to last. You see, humankind are actually the pinnacle of creation. If you study any part of God's creation, the more you dig into it, the more you study, the more wonders are revealed. And nowhere is that more true than when you study human biology. We are indeed amazingly well made. And the other thing is, the Bible tells us that we were made in God's image and likeness. Now, there's a whole sermon around what that actually means, but let me just make one point. no other creature is described in that way. There is something of God himself that he placed in human beings that he did not place in animals, insects, birds, reptiles. We are set apart, and that is a major clue for us. And at the end of making all these things, God said, it is not just good, it is very good. Very good. So if the God of the Bible is a creator, let's kind of do a bit of a selfie and take a closer look at how we were made. Because an all-powerful God wouldn't be making junk human beings. He would be making human beings who are astounding, phenomenal, incredible, terrific. And so we're going to look at some of the medical evidence that has been accumulated over the last 40 to 50 years, which shows us something of how we were put together during those first 9 months. And I'm going to take you on a journey. Hope you like travel. And this is a journey where we're actually going to go back in time. So I don't have a TARDIS with me. We have to use our imaginations. And we're going to start off with us as we are born. And so we've got a realistic photo here. We've got Junior saying, "Hey, Doug, back off, man. Give me a break. This has been a tough journey." And you look at this and you think, "Oh, really? This is disgusting. Is this what you're going to talk about?" Oh, you bet. This is the real you I want to talk about today. You came out covered in blood and vernix caseosa, which is like a waxy skin cream, often screaming away. You're not looking at your best. But let's not get distracted by what's happening on the surface. Let's dig a little bit deeper. Because already we know that you are made up of approximately 2 billion cells. And just 9 months before, there was only one cell, just one, a fertilized egg, a zygote, just one. And then after about 30 hours, it divided into two, and then they kept on dividing, and now 2 billion. And by the time you're fully grown, somewhere around your early 20s, you'll have approximately 37 billion cells. Now, that's a best guess because we don't know exactly how many cells are in an adult's body. Because if you tried to count them, counting one cell every second, it would take you over 1 million years to finish the job. So they're kind of still working on that one. And you know, that's a big number, 37 billion. It's hard to imagine a number that big. But that's not the big news story. The big news story is that just one cell in your body is as complex as your hometown, Auckland, Tamaki Makaurau. This place with 1.6 million people call home is amazingly complex. It's got an incredible transportation system, communication systems, it's got factories and houses, it's got machinery, it's got power supplies. And your cells have those as well. And they actually work a lot better than many parts of the Auckland systems. So if we were to take a little bit of a journey into one cell, just one, we would find that it is not simple at all. Scientists no longer refer to simple cells because they know even the so-called simplest one is phenomenally complex. And the cells that make up your body are the pinnacle of complexity. So what I want to do is just look at one part of one cell. Okay, let's keep it simple because I don't have weeks and weeks and weeks to talk about the whole cell. I'm just going to talk about the mitochondria, the power plant of the cell. And what we're going to do is take an animated journey into the mitochondria and see something of what is going on. You know, at the end of that animation, I don't know if you noticed, there were these little rotating thingies in there. those are molecular machines. They're called ATP synthase, funny name, but basically they're rotary motors. They're 200,000 times smaller than the head of a pin. They're made up of 29 subunits. About 3,000 amino acids are taken to form them. They rotate at speeds of about 7,000 revolutions a minute. They're powered by a current of hydrogen ions, and they're about 100% efficient. Inside you are around 10,000 billion of those rotary motors. And that's what keeps you alive. In fact, that's what keeps most of life on Earth alive. Without ATP synthase motors, this planet would be as barren as Mars. And do you think you could just throw some molecules together and get all of those motors running? Well, I think that takes more faith than I have. And remember last week, Zalia took us to Psalm 139, and she read the whole psalm, and there was this part in it which is really well known. But having given you a little bit of context from the field of biology, we can truly say we are fearfully and wonderfully well made. Of course, school system and the internet kind of focuses on the machinery that people make rather than the wonder of human beings. We're a little bit out of favour. And we focus on buildings and cars and, all the stuff, electronics that we make, and some of it is pretty cool. But let's for a minute look at the most complex and costly flying machine that human beings ever made. And we'll make a comparison. Roughly there are about 2.5 million components to build a space shuttle. But most of those are actually quite simple. They're things like nuts and bolts, rivets, washers, a bit of plastic, some rubber, a little bit of gold on the windscreen. That's all you need to make the most complex and costly flying machine that people have ever made. Now compare those 2.5 million components with the 37 billion building blocks needed to make you, and as far as I'm concerned, there is no contest here. In fact, the most complex part of this flying machine, it's the astronaut, and we miss it. Well, you might be wondering, where am I going with this talk? Hey, I'm getting off track. Am I going to take you to the moon with the Mona Lisa or her sister, the Luna Lisa? No, you can relax. We're not going to the moon. We're actually going to the womb. And we're going to use 3D 4D ultrasound to take you inside the womb where you were built. Now, this is 11 weeks before birth. And what we just see here is Junior kind of wriggling around, trying to get comfortable, ready for nap time. And what's he doing? Yawning, yeah. Did you know you start yawning in the womb? Yeah, you start sleeping in the womb, you're awake in the womb, you move around in the womb, and you yawn in the womb. You do a whole heap of things. And yawning actually starts not in the third trimester, but in the first trimester, the first part of pregnancy, the first 3 months. Do you know they've even noticed what we call rapid eye movements using ultrasound in the baby in the womb? This is you, little rapid eye movements, and that suggests that you might even start dreaming before birth. Now, we don't know for sure, right? It's just the indications are there that you do a whole heap of things before you're born. We think life kind of starts at birth. No way. For those 9 months, so much has been going on. And we're going to talk about more of those as we go back in time. So just to orientate you, pregnancy lasts 38 weeks on average, not 40. We gauge 40 weeks as starting from the first day of the mother's last menstrual period. But that's 2 weeks before conception. So you spend literally around 38 weeks in the womb. And what we're doing is we're going backwards. And we've now gone backwards to the end of the second trimester. So this is 14 weeks before you're born. And at this stage, you're about the size of your hand from your head to the top of your legs, right? Roughly that size. And you are totally complete. Now, you can survive if you're born now outside the womb, 3 months early, right? Not recommended, but physiologically, all the bits and pieces are there, and you can survive in most cases. Your hearing and response to external noise has already kicked in for about a month. Your taste buds are going to be functional in about a week. In 2 weeks' time, you'll be able to smell and create tears. In 3 more weeks, your pupils will respond to light. And in 8 weeks, in the last trimester, the third trimester, musical preferences will already be embedded in your brain. So, when your mum was pregnant and she was bopping to her favourite tunes, it might be why you remember some of those, because they were embedded in here before you were even born. And you know what? Some of mum's food preferences will affect you as well. So we had friends, Dutch family, they really loved their spicy food, and so they made sure that when the mum was pregnant, she ate lots of spicy food. And sure enough, their children like spicy foods. Why? You're affected by the food preferences of your mother when you were in the womb. So don't blame her for your love of chocolate, okay? That's another thing altogether. That's the sugar talking. And who made all these amazing things? The eyes, the hearing, which are incredibly complex. Well, in the book of Psalms, we find out that it is indeed God claiming credit for making ears and eyes and, in fact, all the bits and pieces. And if you study those, you realize they are phenomenally well designed. Of course, over the years, some scientists have looked at hearing and eyesight and said, it's really flawed, it's wired backwards. All sorts of claims have been made. But as you study it more and more, you realize it's our understanding which is flawed, not the design. Okay, we're carrying on. Well, we're not going to stay at the same time. 14 weeks before birth, and this is in utero film footage. And Junior is sleeping. Their little hand is just floating in the amniotic fluid. There's the little nose. There's a little ear we can see, and a double chin, little cute lips, and there's that hand again, just sort of floating in the amniotic fluid. And now we're going to go down and have a look at your toes. There we go. So you're already phenomenally well developed. And in the background, this white thing, that's the amniotic sac. So you actually grow inside a bag in the womb, which keeps the amniotic fluid around you to protect you. And in te reo Māori, it's got a really neat name. That amniotic sac is called te kahu o te ora, the garment of life. So you are wrapped in the garment of life inside your mother. Carrying on back in time, now we're at the beginning of the second trimester. We're 24 weeks before birth, okay? Don't get lost. Remember, we're going backwards. And at this stage, you're just the size of your palm from your head to the top of your leg. So very, very small, and yet complete. Now, at this stage, you can't survive outside the womb because you're not big enough. There's a lot of development that still needs to happen. But in terms of the bits and pieces, everything is there. So at this stage, you already have 28 muscles in your face. And for 3 weeks already, you've been able to make complex facial expressions. Boys have been making testosterone for 6 weeks. So if you think that kicked in at the teen years, nope, well before. You can already tell if you're a boy or a girl. You've been able to tell from the physical appearance for the last 3 weeks. And for the last week, most parts of your body are already sensitive to touch. So all those nerve endings are there. Now, using old-fashioned black and white ultrasound, this is 10 weeks after conception. And watch what Junior's up to. So you actually start jumping around in the womb. Now that means there must be tendons attached to the muscles, attached to the bone. And actually there've been movements for the last 3 weeks. And mum won't feel any of that. It's too early. So you'd be thinking, surely if Junior is jumping up and down inside there, mum's going to be going, hey, what's going on? Cut that out. But it's way too early. Why? Because you're so small. So 10 weeks after conception, you're only the size of your thumb. But you've already got thumbprints, fingerprints. You've got toenails. You've been yawning for the last half a week. You've been sucking your thumb for a week. And at 8 weeks after conception, you've already got 1 billion cells. You've got 4,000 of the 4,500 parts that make up an adult's body. And that is why they change your name at the 8th week. Prior to that, they call you an embryo. Embryo means to grow. That's a Greek word. And now, at this stage, they change your name to fetus, which is Latin for little one. And that's what you are. From the 8th week, you are essentially complete. And it's interesting that even the Bible refers to a baby jumping while still in the womb. And this is 2,000 years before ultrasound was developed. Interesting incident. This was when Elizabeth had been, she was pregnant with John the Baptist, and Mary had just been visited by an angel. Mary is the mother of Jesus. And Mary wanted to go and share the good news with a relative, Elizabeth, so she went along there, and when she called out her greeting, Elizabeth said, hey, I felt my baby leap in the womb. And of course, you might be thinking, oh, yeah, that's just poetic license, right? You know, the Bible's full of poetry. It's not medically accurate or anything. Well, you've just seen the evidence. It is indeed accurate. Okay, carrying on back in time. 32 weeks now before birth, or 6 weeks after conception, right? You're only the size of an adult's thumbnail. And yet, brain waves have already been detected. Now, your brain is not complete. Don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting that this little brain in here is all finished. In fact, it's only really around your late 20s that your brain finishes wiring itself up. So it's got a long way to go. But my point is, the nerve fibers here are already operational and brain waves are being emitted. And this is something we can verify. It's easily detectable, right? Your face already will withdraw if touched. First movements are occurring. The little hand starts just moving at early stages. The bones inside you have started to grow for the last half a week, beginning with the collarbone and the jaw. You've had hiccups. They'll occur in the next week. And your heart is beating away already at about 160 to 170 beats a minute. And in another week, it will be a 4-chambered heart and almost complete, but very, very small. As we go further back in time, this is 33 weeks before birth, you don't look complete, right? You know, here's a little eye, but it's missing eyelashes and eyelids. And here's a little hand, you know, with the fingers. Doesn't look complete yet, but the fingers are busy separating out. Oh, sorry, that was the toes. Here's the little hand. There we go. Because your hand starts with the fingers all joined together. But looking through your chest, because there's no fat underneath the skin, we can already see that you have a beating heart. And that is a beating human heart. So on the outside, there are still lots of pretty bits still to be finished off, but on the inside, so much has already been done. You know, when we go back to 6 weeks, someone like Spock would probably say, what? What's going on here? This is life, Jim, but not as we know it. But you know, that's Vulcan thinking. Let's challenge that. 3 weeks after conception, you're only 2 millimeters long, and yet the foundations of every major organ have already been laid down. So phenomenal growth and development has already occurred in just the first 3 weeks. In fact, 3 weeks before, there was only one cell. You've now increased in size 10,000 times, and you're made up of millions of cells, and inside here is a beating human heart. So your heart started to beat just 3 weeks after conception. Imagine that. One cell, 3 weeks later, we've got a beating heart. And all the pretty bits, your face will develop here, and here is the spine is going to develop, and your legs will form down here. They'll come later, because that's not as essential as getting the foundations of the brain forming, which is going on up here, or the heart, or the circulation system. And a lot of people don't believe me when I say the heart starts beating really early, but this is 4 weeks after conception, and here we can clearly see there's a little beating heart. It's pumping at about 113 beats per minute, and your heart will beat around 54 million times before you're even born. And the circulation system is already well underway before the end of the 3rd week. And you know what? The adult circulation system is about 100,000 kilometers long. That's enough to go 2.5 times around the equator of our planet. And every human being living on planet Earth is kept alive by exactly the same substance. Blood. Blood. Now, what does the Bible say about blood? In the newer part of the Bible, called the New Testament, there's a book called Acts. And in there, it says Jesus was made from one blood, or Jesus has made from one blood, every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth. Everyone made with the same blood. What does genetics tell us about this? Could this be right? That we're all one people? Well, people have been studied from all over the planet, all the masterpieces, doesn't matter where you come from, and we've studied the DNA, and we've studied the blood, and we've studied the genetics, and what we find is that the average genetic difference between any 2 people in this room or any 2 people from anywhere on the planet is just 0.2%. Yeah, 0.2%. That's how closely related we are genetically. And if you want to focus on the so-called racial differences that some people do, unfortunately, that is made up of just 6% of the 0.2% difference. Things like skin color and eye shape, 6% of the 0.2% genetic difference. So if you want to get hung up on racism, you're focusing on 0.012% of what separates us genetically, instead of focusing on how much we have in common. That's not to say we ignore the differences, especially the things we treasure about our culture, our personal preferences. Those are things to be treasured. Our heritage, our whakapapa, absolutely, we value those. But can we not also value how much we share in common as members of one big human whānau? Okay, carrying on back in time. We're now going to have to leave the womb. Up till now, that's where we've been focusing, because life actually doesn't begin inside the womb. A lot of people don't realize this. Life normally begins somewhere near the top of the fallopian tube. That's where fertilization usually happens. And then you spend several days traveling down the fallopian tube until you enter the womb, usually around day 6, and then you implant shortly afterwards, and then you carry on growing, right? So what we're going to do is travel up the fallopian tube and stop in and see what you look like at day 6, 3, and then at the beginning. So, 5 or 6 days after your journey began, there's a collection of about 100 cells down here busy building you. And, you've looked better. You think, what's really going on here? This looks like a blob. But you know what? Those 100 cells are already beginning to differentiate into the different types of cells. We have about 200 different cell types. And the beginning of all those different types of cells happens way back here, just 5 days after your journey started. And we can already tell which is your front and your back. And there is a huge amount going on in there. These cells are dividing and dividing. You're growing, you're rapidly forming. And remember, in only 3 weeks, you're going to have a beating heart. You're going to have the foundations of all the major organs. You see, this is not a blob. This is amazingly complex and growing so rapidly. And already you're interacting with your mother. Not long after you implant, you're already putting chemicals into her body to change her immune system so that it doesn't attack you. You make a huge number of changes to mum's body, and it's all driven from this very early stage. If we go back to just 3 days, we've got about 6 to 8 cells here, and you're packed very tightly into something called the zona pellucida. That's like a little packaging which keeps you compact so that as you travel down the fallopian tube, you don't get stuck, because that's only a very narrow tube. And if you weren't packed into the zona pellucida, you might expand too much, you might get stuck in the fallopian tube, and that would be an ectopic pregnancy, and that would not be good. Instead, in most cases, you travel safely down that tube, and then you pop out of the zona pellucida, implant in the womb, and carry on growing, and of course the womb can stretch as much as is required. For that journey down the fallopian tube, which takes roughly a week, you're going to need some nourishment, right? And these cells here are called nutrient cells, and they feed you for that week-long journey. And then once you implant, of course mum can take over, and she will carry on feeding you for the rest of the pregnancy. So to me, this is evidence of a very complex and very well-designed system, because everything relies on everything else. And most times it works just beautifully. Okay, getting near the end of our journey, we're almost done. This is the moment of conception. Here in this photograph, we have an egg provided by mum, and inside there is a nucleus which contains half of the genetic information that is needed to make you. Right, now dad's contribution, that's the second nucleus here, and that has been delivered by a system that we're not going to talk about today. We're just going to talk about what's happening from here, which is where the second nucleus finds the first nucleus, and there's a little breakdown of the cell walls so that the 2 sets of chromosomes can join up. Half from mum, half from dad. And now we'll have a complete set of chromosomes with all of the genetic information needed to build you. So if we could read that information, we would already know whether you're going to be a boy or a girl. We'd know whether you're going to be tall or short, whether you're going to have wavy hair or straight hair, what your eye colour is going to be, some of your preferences. All of these things are set from that moment in time. That's when all of that information is present. And if we were to type up the genetic information that makes up you, it would fill about 5 million pages of coding. And it's really interesting that someone else has been through this process who actually designed it. So in the Old Testament, there's a book called Isaiah. And in that book, it's talking about Jesus who's going to come in the future. And it says, "Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel." That means God with us. And that's certainly what Jesus with is. And we'll hear more about that next week. We'll hear more about who the Creator is. Who is Jesus? But for today, I just want to make the point that every human being has gone through this process starting at conception. Even the Creator himself chose to come in that way. Of course, he could have arrived fully grown, could have arrived as a baby, but he chose to be just like us and to start his journey at the same time we started ours. Okay, let's wrap this up. In a very short time, I've given you a snippet which shows that human development is pretty rapid because you go from one cell to 1 billion cells in the first 8 weeks when you're essentially complete. That is fast to build something as complex as you are. It's absolutely unique, genetically, biologically, and in terms of your personality. You are indeed one of a kind. It's a very orderly process, so the more you study it, the more you see evidence of design. Some people call it pseudo-design, but to me, design is design. You can fake it as much as you like, but it sure looks like it. And it is phenomenally complex. Every part of the human being is amazing, and no more so than what has been described as the most complex structure in the known universe, your brain. It's got about 1 million kilometers of nerve fiber. It's able to store about 1 quadrillion bytes of information. It's 10 to the power of 15, folks, for those who like numbers. And that is roughly the equivalent of the entire internet. So you might be thinking, oh, I'm just a bit of a dummy, I don't really get it. But your brain could store the amount of information from the world's internet. That's impressive. And it can process roughly 1 million times the information found in every library on our planet. So I would say that human beings are quite miraculous. And what do you mean when you say miraculous? Well, that comes from the root word in Latin, which means to wonder at. And I want to say to you today, you are worth wondering at. You are indeed fearfully and wonderfully well made. And that's what God thinks of you as well. He even put it in His Word. And even the scientists agree. So this is a quote from a medical textbook written by a couple of professors, and they said the intricate processes by which a baby develops from a single cell are miraculous. They agree. You're wonderful. But it's better still when you find out that God thinks you're wonderful. And in the New Testament, that's the newer part of the Bible, there's a book called Ephesians. It was a letter. And in that, it's commonly translated like this. Chapter 2, verse 10. And it says, "For we are His workmanship." But that word workmanship comes from a Greek word, so it's just a translation. And the original word is poema. And poema has a sense of something crafted, something where a master craftsperson has created something of beauty. And so it's absolutely fine to translate that same passage as, "For we are His," meaning God's, "masterpiece." So the Bible does indeed say, you are a masterpiece. Well, is this how we should treat the masterpieces? I've got to ask you, is this all right? If you are indeed a masterpiece, then so are all the other masterpieces on the planet. And this is not okay. And is it okay to retaliate as well? When someone smacks you on the scrum, is it okay to get it back? No. No way. Quade and Richie, man, you just got to get your act together. We need to take care of ourselves and treat the other inhabitants of the planet with some respect. Even the Mona Lisa isn't always treated with respect. The most famous painting in the world, she's been stolen and stuffed in a cupboard for 2 years. She's had a coffee cup thrown at her. She's had paint thrown at her. She's had all sorts of things done to her. And most recently, just in May, someone caked her. You just think, come on, guys, show some respect. So if the Mona Lisa doesn't always get some respect, you know that it's going to happen to you as well, right? Sadly, there are times we are not shown the respect we deserve. Sadly, there are times people don't say nice things to you when they should. and you hear those voices again, the ones in the back of your brain saying, you'll never amount to anything, man. You're a loser. You're just an egg. Man, what a waste of space. Remember that the antidote to this is to hear the words from God himself. Now, in a book called The Gospel of Matthew, in the new part of the Bible, Jesus was asked, which is the greatest commandment in the law? And Jesus said to the teacher, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and the great commandment. So here we go. We already know Jesus says you were made to love and serve God. And it's really interesting that he then adds on in his answer to the question. He says, you know what? The second commandment is just like it. Obviously, that first commandment's pretty important. Love God, serve him, give him everything. But you shall love your neighbor as yourself is the second most important thing that Jesus wants us to do. In other words, take care of yourselves, guys, and treat everyone else on the planet with some respect that they inherently deserve, even when they mess up. You know, as they often say here at Gracegate, no perfect people allowed, right? None of us are perfect here today, but we all deserve some respect. And Jesus gave an example. You know, he told a story known as the Good Samaritan story, where this Jewish guy had been beaten up and left on the road for dead, and a Samaritan came along and helped him out. Now, the Samaritans and the Jews at this stage, they didn't get on well together. In fact, there was a lot of antagonism between them. And let me use a more modern example. Imagine in the Ukraine where there's a war going on, and a Ukrainian soldier comes across a wounded Russian soldier. He could shoot him, right? This is an invader, a hated invader. He's coming and messing my homeland, killing people here in my homeland. I have a right to kill him. But if we use the story Jesus told, what would happen is that Ukrainian soldier would say, well, he's a human being as well. Yeah, he's invading my country. This is not good. But I'm going to go and care for him and heal him. And not only that, I'm going to take him to the hospital. I'm going to pay for his treatment and make sure he's okay. That is the sort of love Jesus says we should be showing for one another. And that is good news, which really should put a smile on your face as we remember that we are all absolutely unique. We are all irreplaceable, and every single one of you is a priceless, living masterpiece.